It's a difficult one for Parso and Binns. They leave it to one another, and it's in! The hesitation has cost City dearly. Makowski has lofted it in.
Oh, sorry, that was last week's goal. Hold on. This was last night's goal. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I wasn't the only one who was getting deja vu. Yes, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Romance Podcast. I'm George, and welcome back to another tactical breakdown video, this time looking at the Farnborough game. Although, to be honest, you might as well save yourself 15 or 20 minutes and not watch this one, and just go and watch the Slough one again, because, to be honest, it's basically going to be the same video. I contemplated even making this one, but I felt like I had some things to say. But ultimately, yeah, it was textbook same issues that happened in the Slough game, so you probably can already write a script yourself of what I'm gonna reel off in this video. It was also probably more damaging a defeat than the Slough game. It was, yes, a 1-0 loss, again, but this game really felt like it condemned us to relegation, to be honest. If you watched the last video, then you'll know that I said that this was an absolute must-win game, no excuses. Now, in the meantime, we got slapped up 7-1 by Chelmsford, so to be honest, that did leave a bit of a sour taste in the mouth going into this game. Wasn't exactly as confident as maybe I would have been before that, and that's an absolute shocking result that we may touch on a little bit in this video. I wasn't at the Chelmsford game, but I, unfortunately, as I said last week, was very much at the home game, was very much at this Farnborough game, and yeah, just textbook, the exact same as last week. As I said, just constant deja vu we were all being hit by, and we knew as the game progressed that it was going to go the exact same way as the Slough game, and what do you know, it did. Must-win game, no excuses. I mean, it was once again a game that you could not afford to lose, but it really felt like not even a point's enough. You know, Farnborough are the team who are directly above us in the relegation zone, and they're the only team that are really in touching distance points-wise to us before this game. You know, Hampton and Richmond and Slough, ironically teams that we've played recently and lost to both of them, and Salisbury are all sort of out of reach. So if we won the game, we probably would have gone out of the relegation zone, which is obviously good in and of itself, but you need to keep distance with these teams to drag them in, because if you want to escape relegation, you have to drag someone else into the relegation zone. You know, Bath can get as many wins as they want between now and the rest of the season, but if they're not in touching distance with any of the teams above them, it's pointless. You need to drag the teams in around you, and Farnborough were realistically the only team at the moment that they could have done. If you were to have any chance of survival this season, you had to beat Farnborough. This was a cup final, basically, and you've got the social media team and the club putting out statements basically saying it's a cup final, basically saying that they want to make Twelham Park a fortress for all the fans to come and make some noise, and the fans turned up, but once again, it was the same outcome, a must-win game, our so-called cup final, the one game we needed to win, otherwise we're basically condemned to relegation, not mathematically, but it feels like we probably are. If you want to build a springboard to stay up, this is the game you have to win to keep Farnborough in touching distance. What did we do? We lost. We lost a game that we had to win at least, must not lose. We lost. And the frustrating thing is it was in the exact same way as the Slough game. Once again, first half, we were brilliant, dominated the ball, had quite a few chances, but just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. Second half, sort of petered out a bit. We weren't amazing, but neither were Farnborough. And then what do you know, in the last kick of the game, quite literally in this case, the last kick of the game, I think it was the 90th minute, Farnborough score out of nowhere. But you knew it was coming, because that's how these games go, and oh my god, it was the exact same playbook as the Slough game. Beat for beat, beat for beat, and we were all saying in the crowd, me, Oscar, Joe, Chris, we were all saying that we knew that this is how the game was going to go after we weren't putting away our chances in the first half. We all said we needed to make these chances count, otherwise, what do you know, Farnborough will probably score with their first shot. Now, it wasn't their first shot, but it might as well have been, to be honest, because they created barely anything. And what do you know, it happened as the clock was running down and it was still 0-0, we still felt, yeah, Farnborough probably going to score, probably going to win this game. That was not based out of logic. They weren't offering anything in the game. They weren't like peppering us. They weren't putting pressure on. But somehow, psychologically, we just knew that that's what's going to happen, because you've seen it with Bath this season, and you've seen it plenty of times in football. I've seen it so many games this season, between watching Bath games regularly, between watching Liverpool games recently, that it's this style of game is genuinely going to drive me insane by the end of the season. I'm not going to have cognitive function by the end of the season. I think my brain's going to seep out of my ears because of how much I've had to watch the same game plan week after week from different teams. And it felt like at the start of the game the players were psyched up for it. You know, it felt like a game we had to win to stay with relegation, a game that Downway's job kind of depends on. I'm not going to lie. The heat that's on him at the moment, given the current form and where we are now slipping into the relegation zone, a 7-1 defeat on the road to Chelmsford, which is inexcusable. I'm sorry, it is. You can lose. Chelmsford are above us in the table in very good form, to be fair to them. You know, no one's gonna hate you if you lose that game, but you can't lose by that scoreline. Losing by that scoreline is never acceptable. I don't care who you're playing. You know, losing to a team by that scoreline in the same league, when the league is National League South, that's not acceptable, and you know, I don't care who you are. And after that shocking performance, the players let themselves down, let themselves down, despite what we said in this interview afterwards, which we'll get onto. Felt like we needed a performance against Farnborough. We needed that win, and to be fair, we sort of got the performance in the first half. As I said, similar to the Slough game, but better this time. We played really well in the first half against Farnborough. The only thing that was missing was putting the ball in the back of the net. And I think that's what's so frustrating about Bath and Bath under Darren Way at the moment is we're not playing atrociously. Yeah, in some games like the Chelmsford game and maybe the Hampton game, yeah. But week to week, we're putting in good performances that deserve wins. But we're not getting them. You know, the best we can manage at the moment was like a draw against Weston and a draw against Enfield. And even those draws and games that we should have won seem to have dissipated now, because we're not even drawing those games where we're the better team. We're now losing them in the dying embers. You know, we should have beaten Slough. We should have beaten Farnborough today, and we've lost them both. We were good in the first half. As I said, we created loads of chances. We dominated the ball. Farnborough, like Slough, offered absolutely nothing. I think I'm realising why teams seem to be offering so little against us in the first half, and it seems to be quite easy for us to dominate the ball against certain sides, especially at home. And that's because I've noticed that a lot of the time the opposition team doesn't actually press us, like at all. Now, it's a weird thing to see, going from someone, you know, that this is my first season really into the foray of non-league football. You know, I support Liverpool, I'm a Premier League fan basically, so the majority of football I watch is Premier League or Champions League, you know, a bit of the Championship occasionally, you know, a bit from other European leagues, and to be fair, the occasional Brazilian game, if I manage to catch it at like 1 AM. No, I like to say I watch a varied amount of football, but obviously this is my real first half into non-league football, you might say, this season. And it's something that I've noticed that pressing isn't really anywhere near as a big deal as the top echelons of the game. Now that might sound like a very basic statement, like, yeah, of course, you know, these are lower league teams. Lots of teams press, like not just the top teams. So I find it really interesting that none of the teams are really pressing us. And I say I find it interesting because we press. It's one of our best aspects I've noticed since I started watching Bath. It's like we actually press really well. We repossess the ball really well. As I've said in a few of these videos, it's what we do with the ball once we repossess it that is mainly our issue. But we press and we repossess the ball really well. But it seems like lots of other teams don't really even bother, which is why it's really easy for us to sort of carve them open and dominate them, especially in those first halves, and create lots of chances, because their main game plan is to sit back in a low block and just try and put every man behind the ball and defend, and then maybe spring a counter-attack. But because their game plan is more so sit back in a compact shape rather than actually pressing us, it's actually very easy to play through them. And that's what we did in this game really well. You had someone like Putman, who I've given praise before on this channel, possessing the ball really well and using his pace to make his way up the field. Then you had a stroke partnership of Scott Wilson and Owen Windsor getting into really good positions. I thought they were a really promising stroke partnership. That might sound really odd to say considering they didn't score any goals. But I think in terms of the positions they were picking up, they were actually really effective, and they were both putting in a real shift, especially Scott Wilson, who we were joking had like negative acceleration, like 37 acceleration if we're using FIFA terms. very slow, unfortunately. The pace has sadly left him. Obviously, it's unfortunate that a lot of the time when he is trying to make counter-attacking runs, he doesn't quite have the pace to back it up. We were joking that when he's making runs, if he's offside, he's waiting for the defender to sort of catch him up rather than the other way around. So he's onside. Sometimes, even though some of the moves didn't come off, and you're thinking if he had that extra yard of pace, it definitely would have done. You can tell that despite his deficiencies, he was really trying really hard to make runs and get into some really good positions and find space for the team. Really welcome return for Scott Wilson, actually. Obviously, he's been recalled from his loan at Weston-super-Mare, and I actually saw him in the Charlie's bar before the game. I was waiting for Oscar, and he just walked in and he was chatting to the people at the bar. And I was like, wait a second, that's Scott Wilson. At first, I thought, oh, he's just come to watch the team. But then I noticed he was actually wearing like an official Bath City jacket. And I was like, wait, maybe they've recorded, but we hadn't heard anywhere that they had. And then what do you know, when the lineup comes out, he's there starting. So that was funny. Scott Wilson, who I obviously haven't seen play much this season, but I mainly know him through my Football Manager save. Now, on my Football Manager save, I was playing a 3-5-2. That might sound quite defensive. I know I hyped myself up as a possession-based manager in the last episode, but it is a possession-based 3-5-2 because the wing-backs play really high, almost as wingers. One of the 8s in the 3 in midfield will go up to almost make a front 3 in possession, and then the 2 outside centre-backs will maraud forward and almost take up the positions that the wing-backs would traditionally do when the actual wing-backs are so high. So which is why in this formation I'll often play full-backs or centre-backs who can play full-backs in those outside centre-back positions, because they would become wing-backs, the wing-backs would become wingers, and then, you know, you'd play a high line, box in the opposition, and it would be a really high-intensity, pressing, possession-based team. To do that with those wing-backs as wingers, you need athletic full-backs, and at the time, we really didn't really have that. We only really had one right wing-back that I could use, which was Joe Rains. We had 2 options on the left, but only one on the right, and obviously in terms of depth, that wasn't very good. And on the game, because this was where it started, this is before I actually started watching Bath City, it said Scott Wilson was a striker come winger, and I sort of thought, oh, winger, he can play at wing-back then, because I literally had no one else to be like depth cover for Rains at right wing back. So I played Scott Wilson at right wing back, and then occasionally at left wing back as well, but mainly at right wing back because he was right footed. And that's where he mainly featured because we didn't play wingers. I think he played a couple games up front in a sort of second striker role. So he was mainly played as a wing back for me. Obviously not for Darren, he started in the 2 up front, and he did a good job. And yeah, sorry for going on another Football Manager tangent, that'll be the last one. I won't go on a long one like in the last video, but anyone who wanted a little update, actually survived relegation from League 2 in that season I was complaining about by 1 point on the final day. My heart couldn't take it, but we managed to do it with a win on the final day. Yeah, honestly, that was stressful, but you know, that's what just being an excellent Bath City manager is. Honestly, get the statue up at Tottenham Park now for me. Winning the National League South in my first season, then winning the National League, you know, still as a semi-pro club, let me say, which I don't know if that's ever been done, and then surviving comfortably in the first season, and then still surviving the second season as well. So they call me the GOAT. Move out, Darren. There's a new man in town. I'm joking, Darren, although to be fair, your job might be a bit of risk, but I don't think they're going to come to me to replace you. I think given our frailties with strikers, I mean, they're all bloody injured, right? But, you know, considering our lukewarm strikers in terms of finishing, I'm not going to say Scott Wilson was any better at finishing because ultimately we didn't score a goal. Him and Owen Windsor aren't the paciest of customers. Maybe he could have played either one of Windsor or Wilson and maybe played a more pacier forward next to them. Maybe someone like Moses Alexander-Walker who can barely get a sniff, to be honest. Or maybe, it sounds mad, but even sticking maybe Putman up front just for his raw pace to, you know, catch centre-backs out on the counter-attack. Maybe something like that just to balance it out. But we were moving the ball quickly to get the ball to them. We were creating chances, as I said, Putman and Alves and Shepherd all moving the ball out wide really quickly and really effectively. I mean, it helped that obviously, as I said, Farnborough were sitting back and weren't actually trying to attack us. Them pressing us will probably cause us to harry and just hoof the ball long randomly to absolutely no one, as I've criticised us in the past. When you've got teams like Slough and someone like Farnborough who aren't going to do that, we have a lot of joy. We can move the ball quickly with a higher tempo, we can find space. We were really good, we were dominant, and we absolutely should have scored. Absolutely should have scored. I think there's a couple times where we were in good positions, but a bit of sloppy play. Something I've noticed from Bath, and I have absolutely no idea why it is. They hate cutbacks. They hate cutbacks and squaring it to players. I absolutely don't know why. They'll either just cross it, or they'll try and score from a wide angle themselves, or pass it back. They hate just doing when you're on the edge of the box, cutting it back to a man who's in the centre of the box, or squaring it along the ground. They hate doing that. It was Jordan Alves in the first half had an amazing chance to do a cutback and square it to someone. I can't remember who it was in the box, but he ultimately doesn't. He tries to take it on himself, and what do you know, it just hits the defender, and then that's a shame. So there's a couple of moments where we're maybe a bit sloppy in some of those attacking moves. But, you know, we did create chances. I think that's what's so frustrating. Bath remind me a bit of Wolves in the Premier League this season, where you look at their results and they're abysmal. But if you actually watch them, they haven't ever really this season looked that bad. And then you watch them and you're like, well, why are they in the position they're in? Because their results are terrible, but they're not a bad footballing team. And it's the same with Bath. If you watch us play, there is promise there. We are good. We've had halves where we're dominant and been a really good footballing team, but we just don't have the goals to show for it. And that's obviously our biggest deficiencies. I mean, I spoke about it last week. I literally titled the episode, "We Can't Score." But then, if you can't score and you can't take your chances, you've got to make sure you're resolute at the back. And we weren't. And that's ultimately been our Achilles heel. We're not even bad defensively, to be honest. I don't think this is a defensive issue. I think it's a mentality issue. I think we just switch off at the end of games, which is frustrating. You can't be doing that when you're scrapping for every point, man. You can't be switching off at the end of games. I think we're sort of light on fitness, which is why I think we peter out in the second half, because the boys get a bit tired. But then at the end, the same is against Slough. We just switch off right at the end of the game. Farnborough offered absolutely nothing, yet we still switched off and allowed them to score. Tilson gets him sent off in the last minute. I don't know what the hell he's doing. But if that's not a sign of something wrong in the dressing room and players losing their heads, I don't know what is. And then we just switch off and allow them to score. You can't be doing that. As I said, this is a game we had to win. But with our striker issues, if you can't score goals, you at least need to not concede. And we conceded, and you can't do that when you're scrapping for every point. And it's so frustrating, because I speak about this as a must-win game, and I spoke about the Slough game as a must-win game, but me and Joe worked it out, that if we'd drawn this game against Farnborough, and drawn the game against Slough, we'd actually be out of the relegation zone. Albeit on goal difference, but we'd still be out of the relegation zone. Just those 2 points. Getting a point against Slough and getting a point against Farnborough, not even winning both those games, and we'd still be out of the relegation zone. So even points, even not even winning the game, and we can say these are must-win games, and they are, but even just getting a point out of those 2 games would have done us good. We'd be out of the relegation zone on goal difference. Farnborough slipped in, but we didn't. Switching off at the back at the end of games twice has cost us, and it's cost us a spate out of the relegation zone. You can talk about the forwards not finishing all you want, but ultimately we'd still be getting points if we didn't switch off at the end of games. And that's the most frustrating thing, because that's a mentality issue. The players, I don't know what's going on in their heads, but that's the sign of a failing team. When players are doing that, that's a sign of a poor mentality for your side. Ultimately, that's the players' issues, but that's a dressing room issue, because the mentality clearly isn't there, and that comes from the top. And that comes from Darren Way. Am I Darren Way in? Am I Darren Way out? Ultimately, it's hard to say. I probably am Darren Way out, and that's nothing against him. It's just purely looking at the facts. Is he getting the best out of the team? Probably not. Would I say if someone else was to come in, would probably get more out of the team and have a better chance of staying up? Yeah, probably would. So ultimately, that's probably where I'm sat. I don't think we can afford to sack him, like financially. I don't think that's a possibility. So ultimately, the only way he goes is if he walks. I don't think he is. So ultimately, in an ideal world, I think we part company, but that's not going to happen. So I think we're stuck with Darren for the long haul. It did get toxic, it did get ugly at the end of that Farnborough game at Tottenham Park, as I knew it would be if we lost that game. And they were chanting that we want Darren out. I wasn't partaking in that chant, but it was going on. And I don't think Darren's actually helped himself, to be honest. His comments after the Chelmsford game were really peculiar, where he basically just threw all the players under the bus. He just essentially absolved himself of all the blame and said, it had nothing to do with me, it wasn't my fault. It was all the players who weren't showing the fight in the heart and desire and weren't trying. But I'm sorry, you can't do that as a manager. You can't just throw your team under the bus and say, it's not my fault, don't blame any of this on me. It's all the players. As they say, it takes two to tango. It's a perfect marriage between manager and player for good results. And it's the same for bad results. You can't just say it's all on the players, don't blame me. It was a very poor choice from Darren. And it's not the first time he's thrown his players under the bus. It just seemed like a very cheap, desperate attempt for a manager to try and save his own job and try and keep the fans on side by saying, blame the players, not me. Now, that's not a good sign of a leader, and a manager needs to be a good leader, and that's not someone who's going to inspire the dressing room, Imagine if you're the players hearing that. That's not going to make you want to play for him. He hasn't lost the dressing room already, that would have lost him, and I think that's why we're seeing players switch off in games, because ultimately their mentality isn't right, because the dressing room is a mess, I'd imagine, when you've got the manager just complete throwing the players under the bus and not taking any accountability. I'm sorry, Darren, but you've lost 7-1. You can't say that none of that's on you. You're the flipping manager. The players obviously played poorly. You lost 7-1. Be hard not to. I'm not saying that some of them weren't to blame. I'm not saying maybe even most of them were to blame. It wasn't that much up to Darren. But ultimately, if you're the manager, you can't be doing that. If you've watched these tactical breakdowns, you're probably sick of all these Liverpool references. But I think it's a good reference point to someone like Jurgen Klopp. Now, obviously, Darren Way, Jurgen Klopp, I'm not saying they're in the same ballpark, right? But in terms of man management, you can still take things off other managers. And obviously, Jurgen Klopp is one of the best in the game at man management, so it might seem like a silly comparison. But one thing that I always loved about Klopp, and one thing that got him a very long way, is that in his interviews after the game, he would never throw his players under the bus. He would always be a shield for the players. He even said it himself, he'd act as a shield for his players against any criticism that might come his way from the journalists. And yes, he might say, the team played badly, it was a poor team performance. He'd never call out individual players and never throw the players under the bus and take no accountability and absolve himself of the blame. That would never happen. And yes, he'd probably have a right go at the players if he felt they deserved it behind closed doors. Every manager does that. But the key is to do it behind closed doors. You don't air that out in public. And to do it out in public, shocking man management from Darren Way. And he can't be excused if he's lost the dressing room now. Because if I'm a player hearing that, I'd imagine there'd be a massive rift between the coach and the players at this point. I don't think that he's an awful person. I don't think he's an awful manager, to be brutally honest with you. As I said, in the first half we played some really good stuff. First half against Slough, the same. The Western game, the Enfield game, and times this season, beating Worthing, the Ebbsfleet draw, that FA Trophy run where we beat Dorking on penalties, put up a good fight against Southend. He's had good performances this season. We've played good football this season, and we're still playing good football now. But unfortunately, we're just coming up short. We're coming up short in attacking areas despite playing good football and creating good chances. And we're coming up short defensively purely because of the mentality thing of players switching off. If we can't see out games, one of the most basic things in football, to teams that aren't even putting pressure under us. If you want to do a great escape, we need the manager and the players singing from the same hymn sheet. I don't know if this relationship can be repaired between them. I haven't seen Darren Way's interview after the Farnborough game because it wasn't out when I started recording this. I'm recording this actually the next evening after the game. Usually I'll wait a bit later, but I wanted to get this out quicker and talk about the games in hand, and we can talk about if we win those games in hand, or we're out of the relegation zone. But we've shown no sign that we're going to win those games in hand, because we've had easy games, or easy as you can do, games we've been the better team in, games we've played well in, and we haven't won those. So the likelihood is we'll win these nebulous games in hand is looking unlikely. It's looking really tough now. You can't see where the next win is, because it seems that even if we do play well, we can't even get out of games with a point. I just don't really see where this ends other than relegation, unfortunately. I think this is the first time where I really felt like we've been condemned to relegation. I think all the other times, I never really felt like it was a possibility, perhaps naively, until we actually fell into the relegation zone. And even then I felt that, we will get out of it. And obviously the Slough game and the Chelmsford game, it was like, oh, it's not looking good, boys. And this is the one now where I really feel like we've been condemned. I just don't know what's happened, because if you look at our form before all the postponed games, our form was actually pretty decent, pretty middle of the road, But then since all the delays, we just can't buy a good result from anywhere. Like I said, even if we play well in games, we can't buy a result. Darren Way's got a job on his hands. I really hope him and the boys can do it, but I'm not too hopeful at the moment that we're going to be in this division next season. But yes, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more tactical breakdowns from me and more general episodes of the pod as well. There's no pod this week, just because lots of us were busy with university assignments and things. You have to remember, we are uni students at the end of the day. We will have a pod next week covering the Hornchurch and Horsham games. But hopefully this tactical breakdown coming out a little bit earlier than usual may, quench your undying thirst for podcast action. Jesus, that's a weird phrase. I'm never saying that again. Yes, of course, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys look forward to the Hornchurch game. I hope you have a good rest of your week. And up the bath. Cheers, guys. Goodbye.